Hi, my name is C.S. Richardson, and I'm a writer. But like most writers, I don't make a living at writing. I have to have a day job. My day job is I design books for other writers. My official title is Vice President and Creative Director at Random House of Canada. What that means, in effect, is I design books for a living. The books started out as illuminated manuscripts. It was the monks beavering away in their little garrets, drawing decorative capital letters and illustrating biblical texts and religious texts. The way, the manner that they were produced, the way that a monk would hold his pen, and how he would have to deal with the fact that he was literally by hand copying the Bible out, dictated the kind of margins on a page and how much room he had to rest his hand physically. So that's where books and book design started. Along comes Mr. Gutenberg and his movable type and his printing press. So now books are being more mass-produced, designing type, making type blocks, and arranging them in such a fashion on the page and producing them in mass quantities. They were retaining some of the elements of those illuminated manuscripts, such as the decorative capital letter at the beginning of a section of text. Things that were missing at that point were things like paragraph breaks and line spacing and leading and all those other kinds of things, because the monks just kept writing the text, filling up as much of the page as they could physically, but still pretty hard to read. The text is leaded very tight. It's consistent. There are no paragraph breaks. There's no ragged setting. It's all flush and blocked in. Well, back in the 15th century, the publisher was the printer, and printers often wanted to show off their abilities. So what they would do is they would take what had become, frankly, a rather boring page, hard to read, and do a little showing off. So they would go back to what the illuminated manuscripts were doing and take those basic things and then put their own spin on it. So then you would end up with a page, not so much that it would enhance the text, but rather to show off how good this printer was at producing a beautiful book. By about the 1700s, printers had settled down. The things that were retained, however, were things like the margins on the page. I mean, if you look at a book from the 1760s, the margins on that page are not too far removed from the illuminated manuscripts 300 years before. There were various schools of design, of book design, or printers in France or Great Britain were designing a certain style of book, and printers in Italy were designing a different style of book. It was an example from the mid-1700s of a Venetian printer who had done a book of poetry, and at that time the Rococo style was very much in prominence. So the book reflected that Rococo sensibility. And basically a book that you see today is not at all removed from a book that was printed by the mid-1800s. The words were being served more than a printer's notion of what they could or couldn't do. In the late 1800s, there were authors and there were graphic artists and fine artists who were also involved in book design. 1890, James McNeill Whistler was involved in designing a book, and he had come out. He was looking at a page as elements on a page. He wasn't necessarily concerned so much about the words on the page, but how the shape of that text block or those text blocks integrated with each other. So he came up with interesting notions of how to treat footnotes, how to treat what we would call today a sidebar. Another example was William Morris. He would design books which would harken back to the old illuminated manuscripts, and they were, an objet as much as anything else. One of the things that happened around this time was that the economy of making a book came to the fore. Up until this point, the cost of producing a book was secondary to how that book looked. A lot more people were reading books, were the entertainment. Printers were producing books in vast quantities. They realized the economies of cramming as many words onto a page as possible, of not having a book being 1,000 pages, of using thin paper. That all came out of economy, to produce a cheap book for a mass audience.